Primary election day is Tuesday, June 4th. Now is the time to make a plan. Whether you plan to vote absentee by mail, in person at your county auditor's office before Election Day, or at your polling place on June 4th, it's important you take steps now to make your plan at voterready.iowa.gov. Remember, Election Day is Tuesday, June 4th. Find more info at voterready.iowa.gov. This message is presented by the Iowa Secretary of State.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
This is Girls Stop Playing, a weekly show that empowers Black women to stop playing with their potential so they can live a life that they love. I'm Coriel, your favorite homegirl, and I'm on a mission to help Black women make the money and get the honey. You can have it all as long as you're willing to work. Welcome back to another episode of the Girls Stop Playing podcast. It's your favorite homegirl, Coriel, here to encourage you to stop playing with your potential and start working for what you want in life and in love. You already know that I'm bringing you the information and the conversations to help you make the money and get the honey. You can have it all as long as you are willing to work. And today I have the pleasure, the honor of introducing you to my soror. The Dr. Shante is not in the building, but she's here in spirit. So welcome to the show, Dr. Shante.
Thank you, soror. I appreciate this warm welcome.
Of course. So I literally am so ready to jump right in, but I'm not going to do that to you. I am definitely going to put some respect on your name by having you give yourself a proper introduction for people who are not familiar.
Allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is
That.
Shante. That, right. Okay. So no, seriously, I'm Dr. Shante, and I help individuals through a lens of trauma-informed care build whole and healthy lives in their personal lives and in their relationships. And trauma comes in many forms. And so I do that through life coaching and through content creation. And you can find me at Dr. Shante Says on all of my social channels.
So Dr. Shante, we go way back to 2016, I believe. I honored you as a working woman in Chicago, specifically on my book tour way back when.
Yes.
And when I tell you, now you know this is for the people, but when I tell y'all that the city showed up and showed out for Dr. Shante, it was bananas. I'm talking about to the point where we literally got put out of the space that we were hosting this event in, because there were so many people who showed up in support of you. And I think that just speaks to not just your personality and persona online, but the work that you do in real life. So definitely got to give you your flowers, because you ain't just a social media influencer. I think social media is finally catching up to your magic and who you have always been. But I definitely have appreciated just us being connected all of these years.
Let me give you your flowers as well, because there's something to be said for longevity in this game. And when I say game, meaning diverging from that traditional path of 9 to 5. And for the record, I'm not knocking a 9 to 5. I'm still very much a full-time professor. It's just that career path allows me a lot of flexibility to do the Dr. Shante thing. But yeah, you've been doing this for a long time, and that consistency on your end, the consistency on my end, it's like that iron sharpens iron, game recognized game, but it's not, it's actually turning into transformed lives and money in the bank. So I just want to applaud you for continuing to be consistent in your platform and serving others as well.
Thank you. And I gotta just be honest and say that this is serving myself as well, because these conversations that I'm able to have, these connections that I'm able to make, I learn just as much through asking these questions as, hopefully my audience, my listeners learn through hearing these interviews. And so for this conversation specifically that we're about to get into, so I preface this, by saying we've been connected forever, ever, ever. But you posted, and I don't know how recent this was, but fairly recent, you made a post about your own mama trauma, like the issues that you have experienced and, are probably still experiencing with your mom. And my audience knows, y'all know my business. I am very honest in saying I got mommy issues. Okay. People always talk about daddy issues, but your girl got mommy issues. And in my personal development, I realized that I'm not unique. Like, I'm not special in having mommy issues, unfortunately. And so for someone in your space with the work that you do specifically, I found it so interesting that you also are struggling with and suffering with these mommy issues. So, wherever you would like to start in terms of just, you know, how you are dealing with or helping other women deal with their mama trauma, I would love for us to just go there, because this is not, unfortunately, we are not unique.
We are not unique. And what's interesting is for many years, to your point, it seemed perfectly cool to kind of like hang the man up like a piñata and just beat him, like he ain't this and he ain't that and deadbeat dads and all of that. And this conversation doesn't negate that. I mean, there are absolutely lots of men who have chosen not to be meaningful participants and responsible participants in their children's lives. But I appreciate you bringing this conversation to surface and to light, especially in a Black community. Okay, not to say that you only and exclusively service a Black community, but for Black women to be having this conversation, because in the Black community especially, there is a cultural expectation that you keep the business in the house. That is like this embedded sense of loyalty. We don't air our dirty laundry. We don't talk about what happens inside this house, outside this house, and that's just kind of like law. And then when you start to try to express some of your hurt, some of your pain where your mother is concerned, there's this silencing mechanism like, yeah, but okay, but that's your mama. Like, no matter what your mama says and no matter what your mama does, your loyalty um, protects her deeds, okay? And whatever mistreatment or abuse you may have suffered, you keep that to yourself, because there seems to be like this real protective mechanism in place, for the matriarch. And so, us actually just even having this conversation publicly and out loud is a shift away from that very real cultural phenomenon of silencing when it comes to specific types of pain. So, that's one. But the other part is when you're talking about mama trauma. I remember when I started therapy, I too thought I was going to be sitting on the couch talking about the invisible man, the father that never showed up. But lo and behold, the more I sat, the more I talked, the more I realized where I was struggling, and specifically struggling with, this is where the issues came to a head for me. My mother in her 50s started to have some real significant health challenges. And the expectations for me to be kind of like right at her side during that time was made very clear. And me, I was struggling with that. I was like, I didn't want to be there. It was stressful. I was reluctant. And I really started to beat myself up. I was like, what is wrong with you? Like, that is your mother. Like, what is your deal? And I started shaming myself, right? It's like, what kind of daughter are you? What kind of Christian are you? What kind of, like, I just could not reconcile why my mother in her time of need and issues with her health, that I had such a reluctance to be there. And so that's actually what drove me to therapy. And through that process, my therapist put it like this. So my mother, I realized, had relied on me from a very young age to take care of her, to take care of her needs, to be her sidekick, to be her road dog, to be her buddy, her combat soldier in the trenches, so to speak. So that means that I was exposed to a lot of things that I had no business being exposed to, saw some things, lived in a household that was characterized by violence and abuse and chaos and instability. And I was still expected to, wash those dishes, make sure my sister, was cool and situated, and, not broadcast the business outside of the house and keep my grades up and all of that, right? Like that was a reliance. And for a time we lived away from my nuclear family, so like grandma and cousins. And so like even on road trips, like leaving the house at like 11, 12 o'clock at night to get on the road, her expectation was like, okay, I expect you to be awake. I expect you to keep me company. Like I expect you to be here with me. Don't just go to sleep. Meanwhile, I'm like 8. I'm like 9, 10. So when I started to realize how long my mother had been depending on me, fast forward in adulthood, when she got sick, my therapist said, your mama had run out of tokens. I said, yeah, she had run out of tokens because the natural trajectory of childhood development, theoretically, the child gets to be a child for a certain amount of years, and they get to be poured into and nurtured and supported and guided. And then the seeds planted during that time period come to harvest when in later years the parent is struggling in health. Now it should be like, okay, now I get to return the favor, right? But if that seed was never planted, then in adulthood you can't reap a harvest that you haven't planted, and that's where the struggles began.
Oh, you said so much. From the guilt of, I don't even want to admit this. I don't even want to speak this out of my mouth because it's your mama. She's done so much. The assumption, and not even that, there are, and y'all don't judge me for anything I say during this conversation, but there are things that I feel like, even as a mother myself, I feel like I am not really going to get credit. I don't deserve points for like changing your diaper when it needs to be changed and making sure that you're fed and clothed. Like those are basic needs. And yes, my basic needs were always met, but not ever hearing I love you, not ever feeling supported, not ever feeling, nurtured. Those are things that I feel like should be expectations of mothers that I don't really feel like in our community that is the expectation. I feel like a lot of times, as long as your basic needs were met, you shouldn't really be complaining because your mom did the best that you could or that she could. So that guilt part of it is definitely super common. But then I also can remember, and not even remember because it still is a feeling of, when people have this fantasy of like getting rich and buying their mother's homes. I've never been able to relate to that. And I've always had a little bit of guilt. And that's like a superficial kind of example, but I've had guilt around, I ain't working so hard to take care of my mama. I'm not working so hard because I want to make up for all of this that she did for me. And there's even guilt that I put on myself for having that feeling. So what do we do with this, Dr. Shante, other than like go to therapy? Is there anything else to be done?
Say, is there anything else to be done? So I want to touch on something that you just said, like the growing up without the hugs and the I love yous. Like, I cannot tell you how many mothers really struggle to be affectionate with their children because they don't have a frame of reference for affection from parent to child. Okay. So they're like, yeah, we didn't do that in our family. My mom wasn't emotionally available for me. And I've had clients, friends have experiences with their mothers where their mothers will literally say things like, I could have left you on the curb, or I could have went to the abortion clinic, like, and the thing is, it's like, okay, are you thinking about the long range implications of what that sets up in a child's mind in terms of their sense of self, their worthiness? And the implication there is basically you should be grateful, to your point, that you got food, clothes, and shelter. Outside of that, I don't have to do anything for you. Lots of mothers have said that. Outside of the bare minimum, I don't have to do anything for you. And so if you got the bare minimum, then I quote unquote did my job. And then fast forward, if you grow up in that environment and then subsequently do something like graduate without a teenage pregnancy or go to college, and get a degree and get yourself a quote unquote good job with benefits, then well, hot damn. Mama done did the damn thing. Like, you turned out all right, didn't you? But to your point, we're not all right. We are not all right. And so I think part of this of unpacking this is number one, and this honestly is the toughest step for a lot of people, is you just have to tell the truth. Okay, like you have to come to a place of truth about what your childhood really was, and the dynamics of what that really was, because if you don't come to truth about it, you will begin to and many of us have normalized dysfunction. You'll think it's normal to talk to your kids any old kind of way. You'll think it's normal not to show affection. You'll think it's normal not to apologize when you are in the wrong. Yes, even to your children. I've apologized to my kid many a time and just owned my stuff, flat out. And she'll say, it's all right. I'm like, no, it's not all right. I said, if it was all right, I wouldn't be apologizing. And I just want to make it clear that certain behavior is not okay. But that's new. That is a divergence from how we grew up. So the first thing that you have to do is to be honest. And here's the thing, Coriel. Multiple things can be true, meaning you can love your mother and you can also not be chomping at the bit to spend time with her, because the way her personality is set up or the way her comments out of her mouth are set up are off-putting, make you uncomfortable. There are a lot of I've heard a lot of women, friends, clients say, if this woman was not my mother, she would not be in my life. I would not be friends with someone like this. And so part of it is like, okay, all of these things can be true, because sometimes where we get stuck is thinking that either I have to love my mother and be willing to be like go to brunch and be besties and hashtag mommy daughter, hashtag twins for life, like it has to be that, or it has to be no contact. Like, no. No, it doesn't have to be either or. Multiple things can be true. And so, number one, it's about being honest about the kind of upbringing that you really had, accepting that multiple dynamics can be true. And then the second part is you get to decide. Here it is. You get to decide what kind of relationship you want to have with your mother. Because here's the thing, when you're a kid, you don't have any choices, you don't have any agency, you can't support yourself. You just got to roll with the punches, suck it up, and survive. Okay. But once you come out of survival and you get to a point of adulthood and agency, now you have choices that you did not have back then. And so some people have decided, okay, I'll do holidays. I'll do, birthdays, Mother's Day. We'll swing by on Easter and, we'll spend a couple of hours maybe on Thanksgiving or Christmas, depending on what I've worked out with my partner. Then, we'll move on. Some people have been like, I will, if you are sick or you have some basic needs that are not being met, I will help you and support you, but don't be expecting a card at Christmas time. Like, we have choices about how we want to navigate. And part of those choices, number three, is not allowing other people, family members, friends, society, or whatever, to guilt and shame you about what that relationship gets to look like. Because in the words of Rob Bass, it take two to make a thing go right. Okay. And so if your mother is locked into this mindset of entitlement about what she deserves based on the sacrifices that she made for a child that didn't ask to come here, well, then that's her choice, but you have one as well.
It gets so tricky, Dr. Shante, when you start talking about you becoming a mother yourself, when you start talking about your kids having a relationship with their grandparents, when you start talking about you feeling like you have to sacrifice yourself to maintain, to your point, to maintain some relationship. And it's just a lot of gray area. And I think that for Black women specifically, and yes, to to respond earlier, I am talking to Black women 100%. This is for Black women, for us, by us.
Okay, right on.
But for Black women specifically, we got an extra layer of like post-slavery, post-traumatic slavery disorder. So it's generational. So, and again, a lot of this conversation, I'm only referencing what I know, which is me and my mommy issues. But I know that my mother had issues with her mother. And so in her mind, and this I think is probably not unique, as long as she wasn't doing what she feels like was done to her, she was doing all right. Like as long as I'm not dragging you like my mama was dragging me, then I'm doing okay. And she literally said out of her mouth, well, I was not hugged and said, I love you. And so the logical part of me is like, well, if you know how it feels, why would you turn around and do the same thing? But then the other side, whatever is the other side of logical, is like, well, you don't really know how to do that because you've never experienced it. So it's such a hard place to be in, where it's like, I feel bad because you really never experienced this and don't know how to do it. But at the same time, neither did I. And I'm over here trying to figure this shit out. And it's hard. So,
So
how do you figure it out with the added layer of you being a mom now?
So here's what I did. And you've hit on two different things, and I want to give two books. So hopefully, you got a few bookworms in the community, audiobooks or whatever. Trust me, I have healed many a wound on my hot girl walks listening to audiobooks. So one book is What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry. And what he talks about is literally what happens to a traumatized brain. And this is why I always approach these issues through the lens of trauma. And so a traumatized brain, essentially, trauma leaves gaps, right? So if you think about a circle, an uninterrupted circle, that's how it's supposed to be. But imagine if while you're drawing the circle, somebody comes along and bumps your elbow. Well, and now you have to pick up from where you were bumped to try to get back to the circle. And then somebody comes along and bumps your elbow again, right? So there's this survey called Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey. It's called ACEs. You can Google it. And it's a grouping of 10 childhood traumas. And you can say yes or no, you experienced this before you turned 18. And so some people have ACE scores of like 1 or 2, which means your childhood had relatively minor interruptions. Some people have scores of 9 and 10. My personal ACE score is a 6. So life was not a crystal stair for me by any stretch of the imagination. It was rough. And so that interrupted circle leaves gaps. And so when you get married or when you become a mother or when you get into any relationship that requires these healthy constructs, it's like trying to put a table together. It's like, where's the Allen wrench? Where's that screw? Where's that bolt? Where's that essential piece that is necessary to make this table work, to make this relationship work, to make this thing called motherhood work? So number one, trauma leaves gaps. And the book, What Happened to You, explains this. The second part that you are tapping into is It Didn't Start With You, a book called It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin. And it talks about something called epigenetics. And you are absolutely right. When you think about the dynamic of slavery, okay? And so think about your own children and how much you love them. And, you would go and claw somebody's eyes out if somebody tried to hurt your babies, right? Well, think about being a slave and bonding with this child, nursing this child, weaning this child. And then when this child becomes 4, 5, 6, or 7, being snatched from your arms, and you know that you will never see this child again. They're going to be sold off into a life of servitude. And the expectation is for you to suck it up, soldier on, get back out there and pick that cotton. The psychological Olympics that you have to do in order to accomplish that is it becomes the genesis of why affection and emotion and love is not always free flowing in Black communities, because it's like tears. I mean, to be frank, would get your ass whooped back then. And so it's like, oh, we don't have time for tears. Okay. Tears disrupts productivity. We got bills to pay. We got things to do. We trying to survive. And so that dynamic, you're right, gets passed down from generation to generation. And each one thinks like, well, as long as it's not as bad as, then I must be doing a good job, when they don't have models, like literally no models for what that type of healthy vulnerability can look like. And the sad part is, and this is what distinguishes Black feminism from white feminism, there a lot of Black women, so case in point, Sojourner Truth, she said, ain't I a woman? Like, what about my tears? What about my softness? A lot of Black women built up their strength as the antithesis of white women who they felt like were delicate and fragile and broken. It was like, oh, I can't be that weak chick because that don't work for me in real life. And so it set up this binary where you had to be either or. Either you were the weak white chick with the tears, or you were Sister Soldier. And Sister Soldier seemed to be the more palatable pathway for survival. And so that's what a lot of our women chose and continue to pass down to their children. That whole trope about being a strong Black woman did not happen by accident. And so I say this to say that getting into that literature is important. And then this piece really helped me. It really did. Let's say my mom's name is Jolene. Okay, it's not, but let's just say it is. I had to stop thinking about my experience and processing my experience through the lens of my mother and what a good mother and what a mother should do. I had to start looking at this through the lens of, let me look at Jolene and what happened in Jolene's life and what was going on. What did she experience? What does her ACE score look like? How many traumas did she have before I came along? Because my mother had me when she was 18. And I can't imagine. I became a mother at 28. I cannot imagine being a mother that young and not having the skills, the tools, the resources, the wherewithal. And so what happened to her inevitably led to things that happened to me. And so I think those three things: one, getting clear on what a traumatized brain experiences and those gaps that are missing; two, recognizing the role of epigenetics and what has been passed down. But also, too, Coriel, I want to get to this point. You said, well, hey, I figured it out. I made a decision yet that the cycle was going to stop with me. And I did too. I absolutely did too. And the difference between you and I and so many of my clients versus the generation ahead of us is that we were willing to be the pioneers. We were willing to deal with the social backlash, but ultimately what ended up happening was that a lot of us have way more social support for mental health and wellness than our predecessors did. And so it still kind of sucks to be the pioneers of that movement. At the same time, we definitely have a different social climate than they had.
So in knowing all of this, you've come into this awareness, you've read these books. If you're like me, you've gone down these TikTok rabbit holes, you follow all these mother wound accounts, all of this. Okay, I got a real good therapist. We've been talking about it all. But baby, when I tell you, after a good 52 minutes in the presence of my mama, she is going to say something that's going to trigger the Tasmanian devil in me. What do you do? And I'm talking to you, Dr. Shante. And you don't have to tell me you personally, but what do you tell your clients to do? Like, what can women do in real time? Not in theory, but like in the moment. Do you do like a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? Do you woosah and rub your ears? Do you like in the moment? Because we're still human, and I can know all of these theories. I can read all of the books. But when my mama still triggers me because I'm trying to make an effort to let my kids see this lady, what do you advise in those moments?
So this is so funny because somebody literally asked me this Saturday about issues with their own mother. And I told her, I said, you're not going to like the answer. She said, okay, well, just give it to me. You can plant the seed and I can decide, what happens from here. I said, you are going to have to set a boundary, and that boundary is going to look something like, because for her mother, it's the same thing. Whenever the phone rings, her chest gets tight, and they don't even live in the same state. Like, it's just because she knows that her mother's going to come with a whole bunch of negative Nancy type of rhetoric. And I said, your boundary is going to look something like, every time I talk to you, it triggers stress and anxiety. No matter how I try to, turn the other cheek or look the other way or let it go over my head, the behavior continues. So if you are going to continue to call me with negativity about your husband and negativity about people in the family and all of this, I would prefer that you not call me. Now, if you are sick, If it's an emergency situation, somebody in the family has died, that's fine. But otherwise, please don't. That's a boundary for her. At the same time, for you, it might look like accountability, right? So whenever your mother says that thing, it's like real time accountability. I love holding people accountable. I always start with a question. I'll be like, I'm sorry, what did you mean by that? Like, can you clarify that? What do you mean? No, that thing that you just said. What do you mean by that? And that right there, it's like, no, pause, explain what you just said or clarify what you just said. And then if they standing on business, if they stand on it and kind of like 10 toes down on that thing, that's when you can say, okay, those types of statements right there are triggering to me and troubling to me. And so if those are your feelings, if those are your thoughts, then I'm going to have to limit my engagement, my interaction. We can keep it to a minimum. I can drop the boys off at 1, pick them up at 3. Like we can do it like that. And allow her to respond to that, because ultimately it comes down to accountability. It's not, some of them never will be, but at least they have the opportunity to do that. And then there's the piece of it where a lot of us who have mom issues, our children have very different relationships with. They know a very different version of the woman who raised
Man,
us.
it's so annoying. Oh, it's so disgusting. Oh, it does something to my spirit. And it's such a mind. It's like
It's
oh
like,
man.
where was this
It's
woman
like
when
I
I was
love you, I
going
love you, I
through?
love you, I love. I mean, it's like a million I love yous. And it's almost to the point where I'm like, are you doing that to piss me off? Like, are you saying that because you? It's to that point. But anyway, this whole episode is not going to be a therapy session for me. But one thing I do want to just verbalize and say out of my mouth, because this is something that me and a couple of my friends have talked about, and we both had a moment where it was like, you too? I thought it was just me. So I want to free some listeners who might have also experienced this, and you tell me what this is called. What is it called when your mother wants to publicly support you, but privately never celebrate you in any way? Like, never acknowledge any accomplishments, but then go out and brag about you to the world, or in front of other people what is that called? Is that, I don't think. One thing about mama, she is going to make sure that everyone else is taken care of before she even thinks about treating herself. So if you are looking for the perfect gift to make mom feel special this Mother's Day, make sure you check out the Mega Moisture Duo from Osea Malibu, because body care is self-care. Since 1996, Osea has been making clean, clinically proven seaweed-infused skincare. So this Mother's Day, treat mom to the everyday spa experience she deserves. Get 10% off your first order site-wide with code GSPP at OseaMalibu.com. Plus, you'll get free samples with every order and free shipping on orders over $60. Head to OSEAMalibu.com and use code GSPP for 10% off.
Primary Election Day is Tuesday, June 4th. Now is the time to make a plan. Whether you plan to vote absentee by mail, in person at your county auditor's office before Election Day, or at your polling place on June 4th, it's important you take steps now to make your plan at voterready.iowa.gov. Remember, Election Day is Tuesday, June 4th. Find more info at voterready.iowa.gov. This message is presented by the Iowa Secretary of State.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
That's narcissism. But what is there a term for this?
So, whenever I see that type of dynamic happening, that is So here's the thing, right? Self-awareness is a powerful thing. And a lot of women in our mother's generation do not do well with things like shame, okay, or guilt, because they know the kind of mothers that they were. Like, they know how they were. And in the Black community, okay, I can't speak. And actually, I can say this too, because I've had some other clients from other cultures, Asian cultures, Indian, Asian Islander, Pacific Islander, say to me similar things like, oh, out in public, because when you're bragging to your friends and the community about what your daughter is doing, for a lot of those mothers, that is a reflection of, quote unquote, see what a good mother I was. Because if I was a bad mother, then my child wouldn't have turned out so well. So I must have been doing something right. And so it's kind of like this counter narrative, like, no matter what she says about me, no matter what she might be talking that slickness out of her mouth, look at this. Because if it was all that bad, then would she have been able to accomplish this? Would she have been able to accomplish that? So clearly, I must have been doing something right. I may not have hit every nail straight, but clearly I was on to something, because this is my legacy. And it's
Mm.
about them and it's not about you.
How often are you seeing competition amongst mothers and daughters?
Oh, so this happens in a couple of ways. So the thing is, when there's somebody who knows the dirt, right? Like, who knows where the bodies are buried or whatever, a lot of people, a lot of moms who, may have dropped the ball or whatever, don't see a ton of value in trying to, here's the key word, repair, atone, um, be accountable to, and do the work to build a better relationship, because that just seems like too heavy a lift. However, when a new player has entered the game, like a grandchild, like a spouse, like some new person who doesn't have all that baggage and all of that history and all the things, then now there's an opportunity to show up as this new and improved version, as the counter proof to say, see, whatever my child was talking about, look at how well I am now. And the thing is, it's almost like a form of gaslighting, because it makes it seem like, oh, my child is just living in the past. They just can't let the past go. I already apologized. I already said I'm sorry. Like, what you want me to do? And it's kind of like, and that just seems so woefully inadequate, because it's like, what's not acknowledged is, this is what makes it trauma. Okay. Trauma has three components. So for your listeners out there, just so you're clear, like, is it really trauma? Is it not? Here are the three components of trauma. So the first component of trauma is the event, meaning something happened. The second component of trauma is the experience, how you reacted to the something that happened. But what makes it trauma, and this is the telltale mark, is the effects, okay? How it begins to affect you in the long run. So, Coriel, you got two kids. Let's say your older son hides in the closet waiting for his little brother to walk by. So little brother walks by and he jumps out. Ha! That's the event, right? Little brother is scared half to death, crying, running to you like, mommy, mommy, mommy. So that was how he experienced it. He was afraid in that moment and went running and screaming to you. It doesn't become trauma until the next time your younger son walks past that closet door, he stops. His heart is beating. He don't want to take another step. He looking around. He's starting to cry. He calling for mama, because now, even though it's the event and the experience has passed, now he is living in real time with the effects of that thing that happened previously. And so when mothers give these I mean, what you want me to do now? Been there, done that. I'm sorry. I did the best I could with what I had. What you want me to do? It doesn't acknowledge the lasting effects of it. And so when you're talking about competition, rather than deal with, almost as kind of like, the bed that you've made, right? Like, rather than do the work to repair the relationship, competition tends to come into play when there's a new audience and there's a new person which they can do some damage control and restore or renew a different reputation in front of a different audience.
Whew. It's a hard life living in the closet, living in the guilty closet of not even, sometimes it's living in the closet because you have become aware or you've been to therapy and realize it's been your mama all along. But sometimes you don't even know that it's mommy issues or mama trauma. And that is probably even scarier when you can't even, verbalize it or, really pinpoint where it's coming from. And so how do you see these mommy issues affecting friendships amongst women?
So it depends, right? On the one hand, because I have friends who have had some really challenging relationships with their mothers. Like, I know people throw this word around, but I'm like, nah, fam. Like they checking like the boxes. Who have had some narcissistic mothers who have latched on to their daughters or latched on to their sons with the expectation that, you know, it's not about you, it's about me. Okay. And one of the telltale markers, okay, one of the telltale markers and the pushback that I always give, I said, I want you to go to your mother or go to your father. I said, I want you to go to them and I want you to ask them, what's my dream? What makes me happy? Where do I want to be in 5 years? And see if they know. And if they don't know, when's the last time they asked? And if they haven't asked, you should ask them, why don't you ever ask me what I want? Why don't you ever ask me um what I need, what I care about, what my hopes, dreams, and aspirations are? Because the hard truth is the reason why a lot of parents don't know and don't ask is because they don't care. It's like that's not a concern. I'm concerned about how come you don't come by and visit me? How come you don't come and do errands for me? How come you don't come and serve my needs? And so how you feel deep down in your soul, that they just don't have a frame of reference for that, because a lot of parents raise their children not to be these thriving individuals in the world and, hey, go and live your best life and have your best potential. A lot of them raise their children with the expectation that I raised you to be a caregiver, a caretaker, a companion for me. And so, yeah, when friends are having those conversations, it's like if there's a friend, because I also have friends who have great relationships with their moms, and I'm like, I love that for you, girl. I love that for you. But where it becomes problematic and confrontational is when they participate in that thing I mentioned earlier, that silencing mechanism, that dismissive gaslighting. Yeah, girl, but that's your mama, and you know how old people are. Child, that generation, they a different breed. But like, anyway, moving on, asked and answered, then that means that that's not a safe space. That's not a safe place for you to be able to express some of these dynamics. And then another part of this is, here's what I learned a long time ago, Coriel, not just about mama trauma, but like just trauma in general. Just because you have been to therapy, just because you have come to truth, okay? Because this happens with siblings. We ain't talking about just about girlfriends. We're talking about siblings, meaning sisters and brothers in the same family, in the same household with the same mama, okay? Just because you have come to truth about what was really going on in that household under that roof and what that means in the long term does not mean that Sister Sally or Brother Ben is ready to come to truth. And then when you come with your new revelations, can be very hostile and very retaliatory, and will just stop you cold in your tracks like, I'm not trying to hear that, because they're not ready to address what that truth means for them. And so just because you are newly free and liberated, that's wonderful for you, but that doesn't necessarily work. That new truth doesn't necessarily work for friends, for family, who are not ready to address those dynamics. And one last thing I'll say is, so to be fair, when I was sitting in therapy, laying it all out, my therapist got to a point and she says, Shante, I think you ought to bring your mom in here. And I was like, what? like, I was not a fan of that idea at all. And it took a few months before I finally came around and was willing to like let her into one of my sessions. So picked my mama up, drove her out to the session, sat there with my therapist, and we I laid it all out, how what happened and how it made me feel and all the things. And then my therapist said, "Now, Shante, what is your ask?" And I would ask your listeners that same questions. What is your ask? Meaning, after all is said and done, after you done laid it all out and said how you feel, what exactly is it do you want at this point? Do you want an apology? Do you want a hug? Do you want like, what do you want? And what I wanted and what I said I said, I would like my mother to go to therapy. I would like her to go and get healing for the issues that she has, so that in this present time she's showing up as a more healed version of herself, and I feel like the more healed version of herself would improve our relationship. And long story short, my mother declined. And so um now, months later, she did go, but at that point, I had already kind of like established my boundary. But I think it's important for all of this because after all of the hashing and rehashing and replaying and triggering and all the rest of it, I think it's also important to know what is it that you really want, because the past aspect of it cannot change, right? And so I think it's important, and it might take some time to figure out, what do you want in this moment to help facilitate healing or restoration, or at least a peaceful path forward.
So step one, admitting, baby, you got some mama trauma, and then figuring out what is the actual solution. Because I think, to your point, that was a big part of my struggle, was the unrealistic expectation of, not that I could necessarily change the past, but I could prove my point and get you to get my side and understand my experience, and you prove to you that my feelings are valid. And girl, stop playing. Like, that's really not going to happen. Like, that is actually never going to happen. So really coming to terms with the reality of it, and not this fantasy that you have in your head, I think is so necessary. But it's painful to realize that the person who should be the number one person that puts your feelings above everybody else, the one person who should have your best interest at heart, truly is not willing to do something so simple, something that's so simple to you. It is hurtful. So I think getting to that point where you can set a realistic expectation for yourself is ideal. And then some therapy and coaching along the way definitely can't hurt.
Some therapy, some coaching, and some literature. One of the things that I found really helpful, and so for you, you're like, oh, I think that there's probably something very therapeutic about going down the, whether it's the TikTok rabbit hole or the Instagram rabbit hole or the audiobook rabbit hole. There is something that is very comforting in a sad kind of way, that's like, wait a minute, I'm not crazy. Like, this is actually a thing. This is actually happening. It's not just me. I'm not alone. And then it's like, you watch the videos and then you start scrolling through the comments and you be like, yeah, this is really not me, not just me. Like, this is really happening. And it's not just happening in Black families, it's happening across multiple cultures. But there's something very powerful about being able to put a name, a term, a dynamic, a phenomenon that describes what it is that you're going through. Because once you know what it is, it opens up a path for you to explore in depth what, the world, the internet, the library, whatever has to offer about that particular thing. It's like getting a diagnosis, right? Like, you give all these symptoms to the doctor and nobody knows what it is. Nobody knows what it is. And then when somebody finally comes along with the diagnosis that makes sense, you just want to dive right into it and be like, okay, what is this about? What is the treatment? How can I get better? All of it. And I think that that is part of the healing journey. And to your point, yeah, you do have to be honest and accept that you may never get that apology. You may never, get the yellow bike that you wanted for your 13th birthday like that. That's probably not ever going to happen. And so you can't outsource your happiness and put it in the hands of the person who hurt you in that way. You have to look for productive ways to move forward that don't depend on that person's participation. And Coriel, we didn't even mention this part. Some people will never even get the opportunity because some of them, their parents, their mothers have died. And so then what? You have to move forward.
Yeah, that's the thing too, Dr. Shante, because then it's like when you do go down the rabbit hole and you see the people whose mothers are like on a scale of 1 to 10, they like a 10, and then that make you feel like your mama was like a 2, then that's the thing too, because you like
right.
Yours wasn't so bad. That doesn't minimize my experience. Like my mama was still, for me, she was a 10. She might not be a 10 in the grand scheme of things, but it is comforting to know, like, it's not just me. I'm not just crazy. It hasn't been me that, it hasn't just been, I haven't been making this up all along. And that is even the motivation behind these conversations, because this is one of many conversations that I plan on having around Black women and their mamas. Because being a mother is literally the most crucial role that we can ever serve in. And if we ourselves as the mamas are dealing with our own mommy issues, we are literally unknowingly just going to continue this cycle and continue passing it on generation after generation. So it's such a necessary conversation. I appreciate you for opening up about your own experiences online to even spark this conversation. So for the people who don't follow you online at Dr. Shante Says, please go follow her right now. Slide in her DMs and let her know that you heard her here. But for anyone who wants to take it a step further than just a follow, how can they follow you or find you online, and any resources that you have to share?
And so the number one question that I get is, are you taking new clients? Listen, the wait list is growing as we speak. But I actually am planning on hosting a retreat soon so that we can just have some collective healing around some of these issues. And so if you want more information about that, if you go to Dr. Shante Says on my Instagram and click on my link tree, it will give you a link to my weekly wisdom, which is where I share all of my events and free weekly coaching for all of those subscribers.
Dr. Shante, I appreciate you so much. I'm going to have to when I'm back in town, when I'm back in Chicago, whenever you're in Atlanta, I need to squeeze you. I feel like we are kindred spirits, and I am just so thankful that we're still connected. So thank you for being such a resource.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And yeah, I love this new chapter of your life. As mommy, it is a challenging role, but as I tell my clients, I tell anybody, I'm like, the best gift you can give anybody is the most healed version of yourself, so that we don't do what you just said, which is unwittingly, unknowingly pass down these generational heartaches to our children. We want them to have a different inheritance, and health and relationship and healthy engagement can be one of those things, that type of generational wealth that we also can pass down to our children.
Absolutely. We are so focused on generational wealth in terms of money, but we should be prioritizing generational wealth in the form of mental wellness, mental healing, and really working through this trauma so that we can create the best versions of ourselves, which, should be our children. So thank you, Dr. Shante. Y'all make sure y'all follow my girl on Instagram and then get offline and find out what she has for you. Tune in to the next episode. I love y'all so, so much. Catch you next week. Peace out.
Primary Election Day is Tuesday, June 4th. Now is the time to make a plan. Whether you plan to vote absentee by mail, in person at your county auditor's office before Election Day, or at your polling place on June 4th, it's important you take steps now to make your plan at voterready.iowa.gov. Remember, Election Day is Tuesday, June 4th. Find more info at voterready.iowa.gov. This message is presented by the Iowa Secretary of State.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.